Hi everybody, welcome back to Couch Crew Reviews.
Today on Couch Crew Reviews, we are going to review the 1986 film Stand By Me, directed by Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner directed films like Spinal Tap and When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, so some very significant films of the 80s. We chose Stand By Me today not only because Colette and I have read the novella versions of Stand By Me, which is titled The Body, but now that we've all viewed the film Stand By Me, we chose to take on this pretty classic 80s movie. I think it's an 80s staple movie that I would recommend to all viewers, and we're going to take that on today. Okay, so on Couch Crew Reviews, we have a few rules of thumb. The big one is keep an open mind. We do recommend to all audiences, all types of movies, within a certain perspective regarding ratings, of course. But some films that may not start out so great might end up finishing really strong. I recall a time when I was younger, and my now wife and I went to see A Nightmare Before Christmas, and we didn't know what the heck that movie was about, and we ended up walking out of the movie. And years later, we reviewed the film and really enjoyed it. So I would just remind our audiences to keep an open mind. Second rule of thumb is watch from beginning to end. It's imperative. I can't stress that enough because a lot of times directors will have opening salvos or opening gestures. Case in point, in this movie starts out in the present time of the mid-'80s, and we're viewing one of the primary characters as an adult, and then we flash back to when he was a child. And if you miss that, you're really missing a huge element of the framing of the film. The third rule of thumb is
Keep an open mind
times two. So keep an open mind about genre, about whether it's animated, whether in this case it's based on a short story. I tend to say the word novella for that. And though it might have your favorite actor, or though it might be directed by the guy who directed Princess Bride, which is another classic 80s film, it might not meet up to your standard. Put ratings in perspective. The Metacritic score ratings on IMDb for this film is a 75 out of 100, and the IMDb rater score is an 8.1 out of 10. So this film does rate very high. And lastly, for today, another rule of thumb is treating books and films. Should I read the book first? Should I view the film first? I tend to believe in the classic, whatever came first, do that first. For example, I read the Game of Thrones series before I viewed before I viewed it as a series. But one of my favorite films, I've never read the novel version of. Alfonso Cuarón's film Children of Men. I've never read the novel by P.D. James, and so you kind of keep an open mind in regards to that, and you never know what might come of the book versus the film, or in opposite order. As far as our approach toward Stand By Me, we are going to take a look at story and plot. We'll take a look at this as a period piece. That was what I was going to write down. This as a period piece, because it's a film that takes place in the late 50s, and I'm curious to see what their reactions are to this film taking place in that time period. We'll take a look at characters and performances in this film, which are very noteworthy. And then we'll comment briefly on the novelization versus the film, and maybe on the soundtrack, and then get to our ratings. So again, this film came out in 1986. It does have an R rating, so parents have to be very cautious about the content. It's rated R primarily for language. There's a lot of cussing and swearing in this film, and so it was a bit of a challenge for me to permit a soon-to-be 12-year-old to view the film, but I felt like the story warranted it. The message of the story warranted a viewing for a young man who's about to enter middle school. In fact, in the film, the boys are about to enter middle school, so it looks like they're entering 7th grade. They're basically 12 going on 13, and he's getting near that same age. The film stars primarily 5 young actors, a few of whom became incredibly famous and have had long careers ever since. The primary character is played by Wil Wheaton. His name is Gordy, and the film kind of surrounds his interactions over the course of a weekend with his friends Chris Chambers, played by River Phoenix, Teddy DeChamp, played by Corey Feldman, and their friend Vern Tezio, played by Jerry O'Connell. And there's a town punk, or in the film they call him the town hood, played by Kiefer Sutherland, and his name is Ace.
So basically the story is about mainly these four kids who go on this adventure to find the body of a kid who got hit by a train. And most of the movie is them traveling across the train tracks. Yeah, I guess it's...
Yeah, and having different little encounters along the way. So the film is largely a coming-of-age story of these four young men as they're going across town on this adventure where they're trying to find who they think may be a missing young man or an injured young man. In this case, there's some confirmation that this boy around their age would have died in a train accident and is laying kind of in the brush. And no one's reported this to the authorities. And they get this insider tip and they decide to camp out and go on an adventure. So it certainly has a classic kind of boyhood feel in terms of four young men going on an adventure, and in a certain way discovering who they are as they're approaching their middle school age and approaching adolescence. What did you guys think of the movie taking place in the late 1950s, soon to be 1960? Was there anything that was kind of curious about it, or anything that was different?
I don't know. If you just watch the movie without knowing that it was that it was based in the 1950s, you'd just think it was like a normal 1980s movie, because like there wasn't anything to imply that it was from 1950 except like the cars maybe. So, I mean, most of the stuff you saw in the movie are things you would see around modern times, so I actually didn't know it was based in the 1950s until you said that.
I think the only two things that, like, you can tell that it's from, like, the 1950s is,
They're out.
well, no, their outfits are normal. But no, I was gonna say that the parents don't question where they are even though they're gone for, like, 2 or 3 days. Like, the parents don't even, like, question it. And then
that would never happen, no.
they would be gone for, like, an hour and they'd be like, hello, where are you?
Yeah. And that's definitely maybe a staple of a prior time. You know, even I was growing up in the mid-'80s, and there were times that we were certainly kind of gallivanting around town for extended periods, like a long time, without any communication to our parents. And I know this generation has been raised a lot differently. There's a lot more self-awareness, so there's a lot more, awareness and even technology where parents can kind of keep in closer touch. And so it's kind of part of the staples, one of the staples I feel of this story that makes it a period piece, that there's this lack of tetheredness from parents to the children, and then it permits them to go on this adventure of discovery. And then, of course, what you find out is that adventure of discovery sounds like a nice euphemism for they have to deal with some things that are really terrible, like punks bullying them and, kind of having questions of mortality. Even some of the adventures they're on put them in at a certain level of risk. And so they, there's always that kind of cloud of mortality or something that's more serious to come. Middle school can become that time of a young person's age where they're on the precipice of something big, and this film kind of always has that. You wonder what's coming next, and so that wouldn't be permissible without the kids being disconnected from their parents for quite some time. As far as the rating goes, I feel like it's an appropriate rating because there's just a lot of swearing in it, and it has a certain intensive boyishness to it. And I guess I just wanted to transition over to Colette and Luke to talk about what did you guys make of that? The boy behaviors, the foul language?
I don't know. It seemed appropriate for like the setting, but it wasn't exactly appropriate. Because like some swearing would be fine, but they were like every other word was a cuss word, so it seemed a little bit overdone.
Yeah, and like I can attest that is not how he, at least right now in his life, talks with his friends. Not that I know. I'm sure there's occasional goofiness that leads to some other utterances. There are a lot of really funny one-liners in this film, as you would guess if you were to hang around this group. Like you could sense a certain familiarity with them. The way the script was drafted, there's just a lot of good one-liners and back and forth between four young men. So I've always found it to be a very quotable film, very memorable in that regard.
You forget the secret now.
Yeah. Each of the characters kind of plays their own role. Gordy is a young man who's in between. His brother recently passed away, his older brother, and he's kind of in between at home. He likes to write, and he's in a lot of, it seems to be like he's leaning toward like academic classes, and his other three friends really aren't. Chris Chambers is portrayed as he's like the budding town punk. Like he's going to be the guy who replaces his older brother, Eyeball Chambers, as the town punk. And then Vern is kind of like the guy they pick on, and Teddy's the crazy one whose dad was abusive to him. And so they have this unique mix of personalities, and it leads to a lot of hilarity and funny one-liners, but it also leads to a lot of really tender, well-acted moments, very serious moments that are portrayed very well by these young actors. So, who would you guys say is your favorite character in Stand By Me?
Chris or Teddy?
I like Chris.
What did you like about Chris?
I don't know. He, like, once again, he had the, like, cool aspect, and he seemed... Sure.
Well, in the last film we reviewed, Explorers, there's a character in that film named Darren who is kind of it's like a white knight character. He comes along, he's pretty practical, but he's protective, he's strong. You know, Luke liked that character in that film as well. Go ahead, if I cut you off.
He, like, seemed cool. Everything, most of the things that happened, he was kind of, like, cool about, but he was very understanding of what was going on.
What about Teddy? What did you like about Teddy?
It was just Teddy.
Teddy's funny. Yeah, I think Teddy's pretty funny too. And the more I think about these actors, you know, River Phoenix was a up and coming actor, died very young. Corey Feldman was a very significant actor in the '80s, but if some of the films that he's been in through the years, like Goonies, like Lost Boys, like The Burbs, like this film, he's a really good actor, good performer, because Teddy Duchamp's character is very believable in terms of the intensity of why this kid acts like such a goof. There's a lot of reason behind it, and he pulls that off really well. But Colette, you like Chris?
Yes.
Yeah. Any particular reason?
Well, it's like he's like level-headed, and he's just like cool. No, I'm not gonna say cool because he's not. I don't like him because he's cool. It's just like.
Yeah. Well, he's pretty cool.
Chill.
Yeah, he's a protector. He's practical. He also smokes cigarettes and brings a gun on their adventure, so they're not. He's not. It's not like he's making the best. It's not like he's making the best decisions. Yeah, that's true.
That helps.
It's true. The decision does help later in the story. I did enjoy Chris Chambers. I've always enjoyed Chris Chambers' character. Chris Chambers' character, because I just felt like, he was tough despite problems in his own life. He was a protector. He was someone who was trying to help Gordy make better decisions about his trajectory in life, though Gordy was also challenging him. And I think as a young man, because I was 11 years old when this film came out, the film made an impression upon me about making peace. And Chris Chambers, that's his stock line with people. Like, hey, are we good? He says peace a lot in the film, and and that's also a component of his character. Near the end, there's a kind of a flash forward to their adult lives, and we hear more about who Chris Chambers is as an adult. Also, I enjoyed the soundtrack on this. I mean, Colette enjoyed the soundtrack too. There's a lot of really good 50s music. I grew up listening to a lot of oldies from my father playing the radio. But I grew up listening to a lot of 50s and 60s oldies, and so it has a certain nostalgia there. The film would have come out 25 plus years after the time it was set in, but it just has a great soundtrack, which I would recommend just for almost the music alone. The boys do carry a transistor radio around, They talk at one point about like, hey Gordy, turn the radio on so we can get some sound. So it's a good little prop / plot device where you're walking around town in the late 1950s. You could still have a battery powered transistor radio and get the antenna going and pick up some sounds, and so it almost fits in as a plot device as well. A good tension breaker for some of the scenes too, that are sometimes pretty intensive.
Overall rating.
Overall ratings. Again, the Metacritic score was a 75 out of 100. The IMDb rating score was an 8.1 out of 10. Who wants to go first on rating?
I will this time. I gave the movie an 8.7 out of 10. It was a good movie, and I feel like they closed it off pretty well. Unlike in Explorers, there are a lot of unnecessary scenes, but most of the scenes in this movie, like, they weren't exactly critical, but they helped the story a lot. So it's 8.7 out of 10.
Dad, you go.
I would second Luke's point about the film being very compact. He mentioned earlier, though I think we cut it out of this in the editing room, he mentioned earlier the film is only an hour and 29 minutes long. So it's a very short film. It's almost like a true 80s film. It just gets to the point. From a storytelling perspective, it is a very tight film. There's really nothing that's wasted. Almost every scene matters, whether it's funny or whether it's something really serious. I really enjoyed that from a storytelling standpoint. I actually taught this film as part of my intro to fiction class a few years ago, precisely for that reason, because I just feel like rather than teaching the novelization of the body, which is the title of the short story this film is based on, it's almost easier and equivalent good storytelling to just show the film. The actors, the performances are phenomenal. I've seen this movie countless times at this point, and I marvel at how well performed it is. To get children to act in the manner that these young men acted in the film is just astounding to me. Great soundtrack, great director, very prolific director in Rob Reiner. For me, it's a no-brainer film. I would recommend it to everybody at least over the age of 13, though he was a little young. And I gave it a 9.5 out of 10 rating.
Okay. So I would give it a 9.6, and I think because it's so short, it can cover everything well without having to stretch it out or anything. And I liked it. Yes. I think it relates a lot back to the book. Words, sentences and paragraphs from the book are exactly in the movie. So it's actually seeing the book come to life instead of stretching it out and adding stuff, taking stuff out. Almost every single scene in the book is in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And you had seen Stand By Me before reading The Body, correct?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And so it was interesting to see how that held up, and she really enjoys the film, and she really enjoyed the novella. And in fact, it's probably one of your favorites thus far. And Coletta's a very prolific reader, and it's one of her favorite novels / novellas to date. And she's probably read, I know you've read at least hundreds. You're probably getting close to 1,000 books, I would imagine.
I think I'm at 100 or something. I don't think I'm that.
I don't know.
I don't think I'm at 1,000.
Maybe I'm including kids' books, but anything else you wanted to add? So, in terms of the overall rating, let's do the math there. 9.6, 9.5, 8.7. So, the overall rating that the Couch Crew Reviews team would give Stand By Me is a 9.3. We would highly recommend this film. Definitely a classic 80s staple film, pretty foundational from a career standpoint for a number of the actors, including the director. I think it's a can't-miss film. Probably would rate it higher if I felt like I wasn't putting a ceiling or a cap on films that we're going to review in the future. Speaking of future films that we will review Frozen 2 next for Couch Crew Reviews. Frozen 2 was released in 2019 and directed by Christopher Buck and Jennifer Lee. Anybody want to close us out on?
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching the first real episode of Couch Crew Reviews.
See you next time.